When I moved to Europe in 1991, I never had any of that culture shock that so many people who move overseas talk about. Of course, there were noticeable differences, but I adapted fairly quickly to the lifestyle overseas. After 32 years, when I came back to the US, I also didn't have much culture shock. Even though a lot of things changed during the time I was gone, the types of things that I noticed the most were all of the different types of foods I've never heard of, or the lower prices on groceries, and much bigger cars and many more cars on the roads than I had remembered. And then after 6 weeks, I decided to move to Alaska. Because I enjoyed the lifestyle in Europe and I didn't want to live in a state where I would be thrown back into that daily life of sitting in traffic and walking around large crowds of people in stores with a feeling of every day being the same, running around in circles going from one place to the next place without really ever accomplishing anything other than bringing home a bag of groceries or some new sneakers. It was a lifestyle I didn't really want to live again. Boring, repetitive, running around in circles, rushing to get from one place to the next place while standing in line behind 10 people waiting to buy my bag of Cheetos. That just wasn't for me anymore. Here are some of the first few things I noticed immediately upon arriving in Alaska and driving for 7 days through the mainland from Fairbanks to Valdez. I arrived in Alaska at the end of September, soon after the tourist season had ended. Fairbanks reminded me of a very small yet spread out city in the lower states. But as soon as I got onto the highway from Fairbanks to Valdez, it felt more like the entire drive was inside a national park that was closed, only coming across one or two other cars every 20 to 40 minutes. I never had such a long, relaxing drive in my entire life. Another small thing I noticed was every 30 or 40 minutes, you would come across another small, remote town, either abandoned or with only 15 to 50 residents. You didn't see many buildings or homes. You just figure the people were living way back behind the forest, spread out along the landscape. Occasionally, you'd come across the center of one of these towns or communities with abandoned, dilapidated buildings, and it was rather interesting stopping at these spots and imagining how alive this town must have been 40 or 50 years ago. Many parts of the drive that I had heard were the most beautiful drives in Alaska wound up not even being in the top 5 most beautiful drives that I had found. The parts of Alaska that I enjoyed most were areas or locations that not many people talked about. One of the things I enjoyed the most was stopping at one of the many viewpoints along the way and having a front row center seat while looking over a valley or at a lake or in front of a mountain with no other humans anywhere around. Just peace and quiet and views, and landscapes that were so raw they almost felt like a giant painting sitting in front of you. Over the next 2 years, I slowly started feeling disconnected from the rest of the United States. There was not much political talk on the radio here, and if there was, it was typically anti-Washington and how Washington should stay out of Alaska. Nearly every commercial described their product as the best in Alaska, and the commercials made you feel very proud and lucky to be living in Alaska. Every gift shop or gas station or convenience store, and pretty much every place you could buy something in, the first question you were asked was if you were in the military or a retired veteran. At nearly every single place, veterans and active military receive discounts. And speaking with Alaskans as time went on, while also becoming very aware at how you didn't see political bumper stickers or signs or banners or flags nearly anywhere, people seemed to not talk about topics such as religion and politics. It seemed like what someone believed in was not relevant when judging that person's character, and it didn't really matter who you were or what your beliefs were. What mattered more was how you behaved while in the community. It was almost as if there was a silent, unspoken agreement amongst everyone, whether you were a conservative or a liberal, whether you were religious or a non-believer, whether you were a heterosexual or not, was nobody's business but your own, as the people had more important things to worry about and take care of that affected them directly. When I did visit the larger cities like Anchorage, this was more similar to a small city in the lower states. In the bigger cities, you would see a group of maybe 10 to 20 people on a corner holding political signs. They were usually signs supporting a political figure in Alaska during his or her campaign. But this was only seen in the big cities, and my best guess is that it is one of the reasons most of the people who move here from the lower states do not want to live in the bigger cities in Alaska. I mean, why would you spend the time and the money to move across the country just to move from one zoo full of monkeys to another zoo full of the same monkeys? And over time, there is also something else that I found quite interesting. I felt as if I'm living in another foreign country, just like when I was living in Austria. It doesn't feel like you're part of the United States when you live in Alaska. Life here seems more similar to the lifestyle in Europe than it does in the lower states. The mentality of the Alaskans feels as distant to the mentality of the Americans in the lower states as it felt when I compared the mentality of Europeans to the Americans. I believe part of the reason for this is that there are 3 different types of mentalities when you look at the Europeans and the Americans and the Alaskans. But another thing that shapes the way you see the rest of the states is by speaking with Alaskans and hearing the words that they use that you slowly begin to pick up. For example, the lower states. That's a word, even if you're new to Alaska, that you can't avoid using when speaking to others. And that seems to be the first disconnect you're experiencing from the rest of the United States. When someone asks you, "Where are you from?" and you say Omaha, and they reply with, "Oh, you're from the lower states," it makes you feel different from them. And soon afterwards, you're in a group talking with people who are using more and more words, which makes you feel even more disconnected from the lower states. Alaskans consider people who do not live in Alaska but who are visiting as outsiders. It doesn't matter if you're from the lower states or from Europe or from Africa. You're all categorized as the same people, the outsiders. And the longer you live here, the more you realize that Alaska isn't only a different kind of place, but it also does not want to be considered as part of the rest of the country because it has its own mentality, its own lifestyle, and its own people. And eventually, you get caught in that web while you're living in Alaska. One day after living here for a short period of time, when the locals are convinced there's a good chance that you're going to stay, whether it's someone you're talking to in the grocery store or the waitress at the cafe or restaurant in town, they will speak to you like they speak to every other Alaskan. You'll go to pay for your refill, and they'll say, "We don't charge locals for refills, only the outsiders." Or someone will ask you if you're ready for the influx of outsiders as the tourist season is arriving. It's at that moment where you realize you've now been accepted into their community or town or city, and you're no longer an American. You're now an Alaskan. When this happens, it is an odd yet satisfying moment, and it will happen to everyone who moves here. It may take 1 year, it may take 2 years or longer, but when it does happen, even though you may not need anyone else's acceptance to feel like Alaska is your home, deep down inside, it makes you feel good. You're now one of them, one of the few and one of the lucky who understands why we chose to make Alaska our home.